We're at a place in our journey where we do not have the luxury of forgetting. When government officials can so easily use the words like garbage and filth to describe our kith and kin, when they can refer to our countries as shitholes, when they can indiscriminately strip people who look like us of citizenship that they have earned, we do not have the luxury of forgetting or of either excusing the racist dog whistles or explaining the overtly discriminatory and divisive statements that are made daily to our hearing. We have been divided with artificial borders of colonialism that split ethnic homelands right down the middle, with half of our communities being ruled by one European country and the other half being ruled by another. And with the labeling of our ethnicity in a colony as intellectual and worthy of education, while another ethnicity was said to be inherently martial and thus intellectually inferior. We've been divided by the manufacturing of coups, armed conflicts, anti-poverty programs that somehow never eradicate poverty, by the selective broadcast of stereotypes, a systemic war of images waged against us, images meant to foster fear and engender self-hatred and portrayal of Africans as primitive savages, whose low cognitive ability makes them incapable of self-determination, and Black people in the Americas as lazy, drug-addled, and criminally inclined. And there too is the institutionalization of colorism. The belief that anything Black is negative or inferior, and the proximity to whiteness is more desirable. It is reflected in every aspect of our lives. And I say us because colonization did not leave us unscathed, quite the opposite. In English, everything negative and evil is Black. In Spanish, la negra means Black woman. Tener la negra means to have bad luck or to be jinxed. A once popular French expression that went out of vogue but has recently been making a comeback is travailler comme un nègre. Travailler comme un nègre, which means to work like a slave. And it's often also translated with the word slave being replaced by a more offensive racial slur. But anything in this life, once stripped of its power, will no longer work. And that is true of slurs, it is true of stories, especially ones that are complete fabrications. Let's take the narrative of those who oppressed us and work it. In fact, let's take their entire modus operandi and flip it and reverse it. And so I urge you, my brothers and sisters, let's be more intentional about our unity than they were about our division. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, our brothers and sisters from the 17th region of Ghana, it will not be a difficult goal to achieve. No matter how we've been divided, we've always tried to find our way back to one another. Africans in the diaspora whose forebears were enslaved have kept us in their rhythms. The music they play, the dances, the cadence of their speech, and even the language. the Gula Geechee people of the United States still count using Fulani words instead of numerals. Yoruba language is spoken in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Brazil, Haiti, and Trinidad and Tobago. Likewise, a Creole offspring of Akan is spoken by the Africans, the Maroons in Jamaica and in Suriname. And Africa remains in our food. American gumbo and Brazilian karuru bear a strong resemblance to Ghanaian okro stew. All three use okro, also known as okra, which is native to the African continent and was transported to the New World on slave ships, as were cowpeas. We call it gobe here in Ghana for those of you. Try and eat gobe before you go back. Another food item that is native to Africa, which would explain why some variations of Hopping John, a dish from the Gula Geechee people, are so reminiscent of the Ghanaian wache. Try to eat wache too before you go. The ways in which Africa has remained at the heart of its diaspora are far-reaching, well beyond food and music. Perhaps the most important way is in the cultural elements that are taught to our children, ensuring the cord that has tethered these diasporan communities to the African continent all these centuries remains unbroken. There are the Kwekua Nancy folk tales that so many of us in this room grew up hearing and reading, and that have spread all over the world to places too numerous to mention. Just like the popular children's call and response folk song that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Cheche Kule, Cheche Kofisa, Kofisa Langa, Kakati Langa, Kum Adede, Kum Adede. I didn't hear you go. Cheche Kule, Cheche Kule, Kofisa Langa, Kofisa Langa, Lalati Langa, Kum Adede. Thank you. Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, said, and that quote has been shown here, "I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." Though I have no proof, I suspect that this sentiment was heavily influenced by his time in America, where he completed his undergraduate studies at Lincoln University and his graduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He was also a frequent visitor to Harlem, and this was in the late 1930s and 1940s, at a time when most Ghanaian intellectuals were completing their higher education in European universities. During his 8 years in the United States, Nkrumah was able to experience at first hand racism and the Jim Crow laws. Nkrumah was already a believer in Pan-Africanism before he went to the United States. He was a huge fan of Marcus Garvey, whose Black Star Line was an attempt to facilitate movement between North America and Africa, particularly Liberia, where free blacks had been emigrating since the 1820s. The Black Star, which is featured prominently on Ghana's flag, has come to be a defining part of our national identity. It underscored his rallying cry, which was the unity of all African peoples. He wanted the story of the diaspora and the stories of all the other indigenous people who had been colonized on the African continent to be a part of our national story. So much so that at the hour of Ghana's independence, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah famously proclaimed that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. It was a heady and ambitious statement, and the years that followed were equally as heady and ambitious, full of growth, infrastructural development, and the building of alliances between other newly independent African nations. There was a sense of hope. No, it was more than that. It was an intoxicating feeling of endless possibilities. It was a pure, perhaps naive belief that we could attain our own modern-day version of the glory that our forebears like Shaka the Zulu and Mansa Musa had, and that we could build our nation states to be as exemplary as the Mwene Mutepa Empire, Songhai, Mali, and the Ghana empires that had existed before. And then came the coup d'etats, many inspired by the imperial nations. Not just in Ghana, but in most of the other nations that had newly gained independence. And then came even more coup d'etats, one after the other, following by the imprisonment and exile of our liberation leaders. We now know as Ghanaians, as author Ama Ataidu wrote, that there are powerful forces undermining our progress in Africa. We suffered decades of brain drain that emptied a sizable portion of the continent's population, adding scores of exiles to the diaspora. And our nations themselves were surviving, but barely, on the remittances that those individuals sent home. It will surprise you to know, in 1990, the total number of Africans who had migrated voluntarily to the United States eclipsed the total number who had been brought as enslaved people to leaving an utterly devastated continent. When it comes to reparative justice, we ask what is just. We're at a very pivotal place in our journey. There are those who have us go backward, not just 1 or 2 steps, as if that would not be bad enough. They want us to go all the way back. They want us to develop some sort of amnesia about the blood that was spilled, the lives that were lost, and the years that were sacrificed in order to fight for our freedom. We are at a place in our journey where we do not have the luxury of forgetting. When government officials can so easily use the words like garbage and filth to describe our kith and kin, when they can refer to our countries as shitholes, when they can indiscriminately strip people who look like us of citizenship that they have earned, we do not have the luxury of forgetting or of either excusing the racist dog whistles or explaining the overtly discriminatory and divisive statements that are made daily to our hearing. This is precisely the time when we must advance and begin the process of reclamation. This is precisely the time when we must speak loudly and clearly, naming what it is we have lost as well as what it is we hope to gain. Her Excellency Mian Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, a great African sister, said in a lecture at the London School of Economics, the conspiracy of silence has diminished the horror of what our people faced. This year, at the UN General Assembly, I served notice that Ghana will move a motion next year to recognize the transatlantic slave trade as the greatest crime against humanity. I know this motion will enjoy the utmost support from the entire African continent and the diaspora. Africa has suffered slavery, colonialism, genocide, and apartheid. We demand acknowledgement of these crimes against humanity. We demand the establishment of legal, institutional, and international mechanisms to advance reparative justice. Reparations must include tangible measures such as debt cancellation, monetary compensation, return of stolen artifacts, institutional reform, and transformative economic redress in the global economic system. Beyond the material loss that Africa suffered, are also the emotional cost to assess. According to the Oxford Dictionary, epigenetics is the study of changes in organisms that are caused by the modification of gene expression rather than the alteration of the genetic code itself. And studies have shown that trauma can be passed down transgenerationally through epigenetics. And so imagine then the various traumas that the people of African descent have faced. Traumas that are being passed down from one generation onto the other. Traumas from yesteryears coupled with traumas of today and the injustices that we are currently facing. What impact does that have on our health? What impact does that have on the health of our children? And most importantly, how do we heal from that trauma? Ghanaian British actress, writer Michelle Cole wrote, "We can put fear of the future in front of us to block us, or put it behind us to drive us forward." As you debate all these questions and ideas, bear in mind that the future is upon us and that the future is African. And like I said at the UN, let me say it louder one more time for those in the back. The future is African. We hold in our hands the power to change the circumstances of our past. But we must be more intentional about our unity than those who oppressed us were about our division. And from the looks of this gathering, I can feel it, that we are more united than ever. And with a united Africa and diaspora, there is nothing we cannot achieve. I thank you. I wish you fruitful deliberations, and it's my honor and privilege to declare the Diaspora Summit 2025 duly opened. Thank you.
Good morning, sisters and brothers. To Your Excellency, President of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, to honorable ministers of state, majesties and royalties, esteemed traditional leaders, representatives of the African Union and the United Nations, to my Ghanaian sisters and brothers, Her Excellency Dr. Erica Bennett, American businessman George and Tim, Maurice Cheatham, KOD, Natalie Jackson, Arian Simone, and Ajua Ashama, and to my brothers and sisters of the global African family. I greet you in humility. I greet you in solidarity. As a member of the African diaspora living in America, it is my profound honor to stand here in the motherland, to be here not as a guest, but as family, not as an observer, but as a descendant, carrying the history in my bones. Yesterday, Your Excellency, I spent the day revisiting Cape Coast with my wife and 25 American lawyers in my delegation. I walked the path our ancestors were forced to walk. I touched the waters they were made to bathe in. I stood in the dungeons where humanity was denied. But the African spirit was never broken. And then I stepped through the door of no return. But unlike our ancestors, I was granted the privilege they never knew. I walked back through the door of return. And above that door were the words that changed me. It said, "Welcome back home." That was not symbolism, that was truth. The African diaspora did not lose Africa. We were taken from Africa, but Africa never left us. As Dr. Kwame Nkrumah reminded the world with his powerful Pan-African vision, I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. Africa was born in our resistance. Africa was born in our survival. Africa was born in our insistence on dignity and justice and repair. I stand before you as the civil rights lawyer who championed justice for Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old Black American in 2012, who was walking home with his hoodie and a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea and was racially profiled and shot and killed by a neighborhood watch volunteer. And President Barack Obama said, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. I stand before you as the civil rights lawyer who represented Breonna Taylor, our sister in Louisville, Kentucky, who the police kicked in her front door at 1 o'clock in the morning, executing a no-knock warrant, and mutilated that young princess's body with 8 bullet holes while she was practically naked in her own home. And I stand before you as the civil rights lawyer who championed justice for George Floyd, who was killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with a police officer knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds while he said, "I can't breathe," 28 times. And the whole world said, until we get justice for George Floyd, none of us can breathe. But more importantly, I stand before you as a descendant of the survivors of the transatlantic slave trade. I represent families across the diaspora who still live with the consequences of enslavement, colonialism, racial violence. For us, reparative justice is not abstract. It is a lived reality. We are one people. No one can divide us but us. No one can unite us but us. Reparative justice. Just as the enemies of equality believe and are unapologetic in their white supremacist beliefs, we as children of Africa must be unapologetic defenders of black life, black liberty, and black humanity. Reparations are not charity. They are not symbolic gestures. They are not moral. They are a moral and legal obligation owed for centuries for our stolen labor, our stolen land, our stolen resources, our stolen lives, and our stolen futures. I so humbly thank His Excellency, President John Dramani Mahama, for that historic speech in New York City at the United Nations. I applaud you. We stand for you for that historic proclamation on behalf of all of Africa. Because President Mahama, your leadership has let Ghana show the world what moral leadership looks like. And we need it now today more than ever. By opening the door of the return, by welcoming the diaspora home, by affirming that Africa's future is inseparable from the fate of her dispersed children, Ghana's leadership sends a message that echoes beyond the continent. That message is one that healing requires truth, justice requires courage, and reconciliation without repair is incomplete. Let this summit here in Accra, Ghana mark a turning point where Africa and her diaspora stand together, not divided by oceans, not imprisoned by history, but united in purpose, not asking for recognition, but demanding repair, not waiting for justice, but organizing to claim it ourselves. In conclusion, I stand with you, I walk with you, I commit my voice, my work to ensure that the descendants of the Africa and enslaved and the colonized are no longer to wait for justice that is already overdue. May our solidarity be unwavering. May our actions be collective. And may Africa and her diaspora rise together to shape the future we deserve. Just like we made winning legal arguments for Trayvon Martin to get justice, and we made winning legal arguments for Breonna Taylor to get justice, and we made winning arguments for George Floyd to get justice. We are prepared to make winning legal arguments for Africa and all of the diaspora to get reparative justice. Reparative justice, reparations now, reparations today, reparations for Africa. Thank you.